You're not living in a stable country. You're living inside a collapsing empire, and the numbers prove it. The US dollar has lost 98% of its value since 1913. Our national debt just hit $36.4 trillion, growing by $1 trillion every 90 days. We spend more on interest than on the military. Fertility rates are at record lows, trust in government is below 20%, and the majority of Americans now believe civil war is likely within a decade. Meanwhile, we've printed over $6.5 trillion since 2020, more than the previous 2 centuries combined. Rome didn't know it was collapsing either, until the bread ran out, the roads broke, and the soldiers walked away. That's where we are. You're not early, you're not safe, and you're not ready. This is the final blueprint, 10 stages of imperial collapse. Spain followed it, France followed it, Britain followed it. And right now, America is sprinting through the last 3 steps. 10 elite isolation. The rulers don't live like the ruled. The collapse of every major empire began with an almost invisible divorce between the ruling class and the people they governed. The emperors, kings, oligarchs, and bureaucrats, who once walked among their people, who once fought beside them or broke bread in the same public squares, began to build walls, literal and metaphorical. In the final century of Rome, the senatorial elite retreated to their countryside villas, while the city itself rotted under plague, corruption, and foreign raids. France's Bourbon aristocracy waltzed through Versailles as Parisians starved in breadlines. In 2025 America, it's not Versailles, it's gated communities, armed security, and $10 million condos in Miami that overlook homeless encampments 2 blocks away. And here's what most Americans don't know. Congressional wealth has more than tripled since 2008, while median household wealth has barely moved. We now have billionaires buying elections and writing legislation through super PACs, while the average citizen is drowning in debt, working 2 jobs and watching their savings evaporate under inflation. The divide is more than economic. It's cultural. The elites send their kids to private schools, vacation in Switzerland, and work from Aspen. The rest live under collapsing public schools, rising crime, and a healthcare system that might bankrupt them over a broken arm. In imperial France, aristocrats were shocked to discover how hated they were when the guillotines came out. In Tsarist Russia, Nicholas II believed his people loved him until they dragged his entire family into a basement. In America, we're watching the same blindness unfold. When elites stop experiencing the same country as everyone else, they stop understanding the consequences of their policies. And when the gap grows too wide, empires break. Not from outside attack, but from an internal rupture that no army can defend against. Spain, France, Russia, they all watch their ruling class retreat from reality. The United States is doing it now, and the walls are higher than ever. 9. Institutional rot. When the systems break from the inside. You can tell an empire is dying when its institutions still exist, but they no longer work. They go through the motions. They hold the titles. They sit in marble buildings, but they don't serve their purpose anymore. The Senate of Rome still convened in the 4th century AD. But the laws they passed didn't matter. Real power had already shifted to the generals, the barbarians, or the gold behind the curtain. In 18th century France, the Estates General hadn't met for 175 years, and when it finally did in 1789, it was too late to fix anything. The rot had already spread. In modern America, we call it gridlock. We say Congress is dysfunctional, as if that's a bug. It's not. It's a symptom. When your legislature can't pass budgets without threatening default, when court rulings flip back and forth every election, when federal agencies contradict each other and the law, you're not governing. You're decaying. Take a closer look. Only 19% of Americans say they trust the federal government. That's the lowest since Watergate, and we're not even in the middle of a war. The FBI has been politicized. The IRS can't answer the phone. The CDC reversed its own pandemic guidance 3 times in 1 year. We had a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and the potholes are still there. Empires fall when the people realize that nothing works, and worse, that no one's accountable. In Britain's decline, Parliament became a showpiece for global audiences, but real power had already shifted to America. In the USSR, bureaucracies kept stamping papers even as factories stopped producing and shelves went bare. Today, we have universities more focused on pronouns than research. Police forces that are both overfunded and ineffective. Agencies with billion-dollar budgets that can't stop fentanyl or build a website. The machine is still running, but the gears are stripped. And when institutions stop doing the job they were built for, people stop believing in them. That's when collapse accelerates. Because trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild in time. 8. Decadence and distraction. Bread, circuses, and TikTok. Collapse doesn't feel like fire. It feels like fireworks. Ask a Roman in 375 AD if the empire was in decline and they'd laugh. The Colosseum still filled with cheers. The bathhouses steamed. The banquets overflowed with wine. There were signs: economic stagnation, political violence, declining birth rates, but the average citizen was too entertained to care. Emperors understood this. That's why they kept the games going, even as the frontier burned. Distraction was the strategy. And it worked. Until it didn't. In pre-revolutionary France, Louis XVI commissioned operas while grain prices quadrupled. In America today, we don't have gladiators. We have 24-hour content cycles, a trillion-dollar entertainment industry, and apps designed to addict you to microdopamine spikes. The average American spends over 7 hours a day on screens, mostly consuming media that keeps them anxious, distracted, or both. And here's the part no one tells you. 87% of Americans can't name the 3 branches of government, but they know what Kanye tweeted last week. In the Soviet Union, dissidents smuggled banned books. In America, we ban ourselves from thinking too hard by flooding the brain with algorithmic noise. The problem isn't just distraction, it's cultural decadence. When creativity collapses into imitation, when TikTok dances dominate more mental real estate than national defense, when celebrities are treated as gods and civic virtue is laughed at. In Rome's final century, sex cults, blood rituals, and nihilism replaced stoicism and civic duty. Today, we call it viral content. Same effect. Empires in decline don't always go quietly. They entertain themselves to death. The U.S. economy has flatlined for most families for 2 decades. But we've got 200 streaming channels, legalized weed, 3-hour NFL pregame shows, and Instagram filters that make decay look cute. We've traded engagement for sedation, and we pretend it's progress, but it's not. It's a civilization sedated on tech, on vice, on unreality, while the foundation rots underneath. 7. Demographic collapse. When the future just stops showing up, it's the quietest crisis. No headlines, no explosions. Just fewer babies, aging populations, and a vanishing future. Every dying empire faced it, but no one ever wanted to talk about it until it was too late. The Roman birth rate collapsed by the 3rd century. The empire turned to mercenaries because there weren't enough Roman men to fight. France before 1789 had declining fertility and a bloated aristocracy. Russia before 1917 was dying faster than it could reproduce. But today, the United States is experiencing its sharpest demographic decline in over a century, and no one in Washington is talking about it seriously. Our fertility rate sits at 1.6 births per woman, well below the 2.1 replacement level. For comparison, Japan is at 1.3, and their population has been shrinking for over a decade. America was supposed to be different, dynamic, growing, youthful. But now entire school districts are shutting down for lack of students. Rural towns are emptying. Even immigrant birth rates are falling. Why? Because housing is unaffordable. Wages are stagnant. Debt is crushing. And people no longer believe the future will be better. And here's the part you're not hearing. The U.S. workforce is aging out. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over 65. Social Security? Underfunded. Medicare? Teetering. Who pays for the benefits when the workers vanish? Who staffs the military when enlistment collapses? The Pentagon already missed its recruitment targets by 25% in 2024. The pattern is clear. Empires run on youth, on belief, on growth. When that stops, when the pipeline of new workers, soldiers, families, and taxpayers dries up, collapse accelerates. Spain imported gold to survive. America's importing people. But even immigration won't save us if the culture itself has lost faith in reproduction. A nation that can't create a future is a nation waiting to die. And that's where we are. Slowly, silently, the demographic engine has stalled. And when the math breaks, no empire survives. 6. Reserve currency cracks. When the dollar isn't king anymore, every empire dies the moment its currency stops being the world's default. Not when the bombs drop. Not when the last troops leave. But when the money isn't trusted anymore. It happened to Spain. It happened to Britain. And it's happening to the United States right now. Quietly, slowly, but unmistakably. You won't hear about it on the evening news, but global dollar reserves have dropped from 71% in 2000 to under 58% in 2025, the lowest in modern history. And this isn't just about central banks rebalancing portfolios. This is about the world preparing for a post-dollar era. In the last 3 years alone, BRICS nations have created their own settlement mechanisms. China and Brazil now trade in yuan, and the petrodollar deal between the US and Saudi Arabia just quietly expired after 50 years. That's not a footnote, that's a tectonic shift. Since 1974, every barrel of oil sold globally was priced in US dollars. That gave America a free ride. We could print money, and other nations had to hold it just to buy energy. It let us run trillion-dollar deficits without consequence. But now, Saudi Arabia just signed deals to sell oil in yuan and rupees. That's not diversification, that's exit. And here's the terrifying part. When countries stop needing dollars, they start dumping them. That triggers de-dollarization, and that brings the money home. Trillions of dollars sitting in foreign reserves flood back into the US, chasing real assets. And that's when inflation goes nuclear. We saw the early version in 2022. Just a taste. What happens when that pressure is permanent? Prices spike, interest rates soar, debt becomes unpayable, and the Fed can't print its way out anymore, because no one wants the paper. The same thing happened to Britain after World War II. They lost reserve status. The pound sterling went from global currency to historical footnote. If we lose the dollar's dominance, we lose everything. Cheap imports, low interest rates, leverage over allies and enemies alike. The empire only works because the money works. When it doesn't, collapse doesn't take decades, it takes months. 5 parallel economies. When the black market becomes the real market. Most Americans still think collapse will look like a war, a market crash, or a cyber attack. But that's not how it usually happens. Real collapse is when the official economy dies, and a second economy takes its place. And it's already happening in front of your eyes. In the Soviet Union's final years, the ruble was worthless, but people still bought and sold. Just not officially. Black markets exploded, barter returned, people paid with cigarettes, chocolate, foreign cash. The economy still moved, it just moved around the government. In 2025 America, we're seeing the rise of shadow economies, digital, off the books and untaxed. Over 50 million Americans now use peer-to-peer payments like Venmo, Zelle, and Cash App, not just for convenience, but to avoid the system altogether. Craigslist-style barter is booming. Local-only currencies and digital tokens are gaining traction. And here's the most telling sign. The IRS has ramped up surveillance on $600+ digital transactions, not because of fraud, but because the government knows it's losing control of the money flow. When faith in official institutions collapses, people don't stop transacting. They just stop complying. And it's not just money. It's food, energy, services. Raw milk is illegal in many states, yet demand is exploding. Backyard chickens, underground butchers, unlicensed barbers, all signs of a collapsing formal system. During Rome's decline, coinage became so debased that merchants refused Roman currency altogether. They went back to barter. The same happened in Weimar Germany, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela. It's always the same. When the currency breaks and the government taxes everything it touches, people exit the system. And when enough people leave, the official economy dies. Not with a bang, but a whimper. It becomes a shell, a fiction. The real value flows elsewhere. That's what we're seeing now. Massive gig economies, self-employment outside the tax net, under-the-table labor that dwarfs real jobs. It's not survival, it's secession. Quiet, local, unannounced. But it grows. And the moment it reaches a tipping point, the federal government's power to tax, regulate, and fund itself disappears. That's when the collapse becomes visible. 4. Military hollowing. When the war machine still moves, but can't fight. Ask any historian, empires don't collapse because their military disappears. They collapse because their military can't do what it says it can do. The uniform still exists. The weapons are still there. The generals still hold rank. But when it comes time to actually fight a war, they can't win. That's where the United States is headed, and you don't have to dig far to see it. In 2023, the Pentagon failed its 6th consecutive audit. They couldn't account for over 60% of their assets. That's $1.8 trillion in lost equipment, facilities, and inventory. And that's just what we know. Meanwhile, recruitment is in freefall. Every branch missed its targets in 2024 by wide margins. The Army alone was short by 15,000 soldiers, and the candidates that do show up are increasingly unfit for service. Over 70% of young Americans are ineligible due to obesity, drugs, or criminal records. But even if we had the troops, We don't have the gear. Our defense industry has been outsourced. It takes 2 years to make a single artillery shell. We sent tens of billions in weapons to Ukraine, but now we're running short on our own stockpiles. In the event of a major war, China, Iran, Russia, we'd run out of missiles in 2 weeks. Don't take my word for it. That's from a 2023 CSIS report. We have the largest defense budget in the world, $850 billion, but it's not buying readiness. It's buying bureaucracy, contractor waste, and shiny tech that doesn't work. Case in point, the F-35 fighter jet, $1.7 trillion over its lifetime, and it's still plagued by software failures and engine fires. The Romans had the same problem in the 5th century. Their legions still marched, but they were manned by foreign mercenaries, underpaid and unmotivated. Britain held on to bases long after they lost the ability to defend them. The Soviets kept the Red Army intact, right up until it couldn't pay for fuel. America's war machine looks intimidating on paper, but behind the curtain, it's underfunded where it matters, mismanaged at the top, and dangerously hollow. And when the first real test comes, everyone will see the truth. 3. Internal fragmentation. When states become rival factions, what ends an empire faster than invasion? Internal disintegration. When the structure underneath is so fractured, so splintered, that the central government no longer speaks for the whole. In every dying empire, this moment comes when provinces stop cooperating, when governors act like kings, when laws are ignored based on geography. The Soviet Union wasn't conquered, it was abandoned. 14 republics walked away because they no longer recognized Moscow's authority. In the late Roman Empire, generals ruled different regions like feudal lords. Tax revenues didn't reach the capital. Troops ignored imperial orders. Sound familiar? Because in 2025, states are starting to function like independent nations. California bans gas-powered cars. Texas builds its own border wall. Illinois ignores federal gun laws. Florida sets its own education standards. This isn't federalism, it's fracture. In 2023, 25 governors formed the American Governors Border Strike Force, bypassing federal immigration policy altogether. And over 30 states now run competing lawsuits against the federal government. Not over fringe issues, but core national policies. Environment, healthcare, elections, even military cooperation is cracking. Several National Guards refused to deploy in 2021 and 2022 under federal orders. Meanwhile, counties across America are declaring themselves constitutional sanctuaries, openly ignoring state and federal laws. This is what the collapse of cohesion looks like. Not civil war, but legal secession by 1,000 cuts. You get parallel economies, contradictory laws, and no shared vision. Add in tribalized media, algorithm-driven outrage, and a political system that rewards division, and you have a federation in name only. The tipping point comes when one state simply says no, and nothing happens. No court enforcement. No federal power. That's how the USSR fell. That's how the Roman Empire shattered. And if you think America is immune, remember, no collapsing empire believed it was. Not until the day the provinces turned their backs, and never came back. 2. Institutional collapse. When the government just stops working. Every empire has a moment. Not symbolic, not theoretical. When the machine stops turning. When services shut down. When promises aren't kept. When the system becomes too big, too slow, and too broken to do the one thing a government must do: function. In the final years of the Western Roman Empire, tax collection failed. Roads weren't repaired. Troops went unpaid. Cities became lawless zones. Sound like ancient history? Think again. In the US today, you can't get a passport in under 4 months. The IRS phone line answers 1 in 10 calls. In 2024, the FAA grounded every domestic flight because one corrupted database file crashed the whole system. Think about that. One file. National chaos. That's not an error. That's systemic fragility. Our institutions are too big to be agile, too rigid to adapt, and too corrupt to self-correct. Remember the $2.2 trillion CARES Act? A quarter of that was lost to fraud. That's $500 billion vaporized. Meanwhile, Social Security is projected to run dry by 2033. The VA backlog is millions deep. Medicaid fraud is exploding. The Department of Education can't manage student loans, so they just pause repayment indefinitely. That's not policy. That's surrender. And when the government fails, people stop relying on it. In 2025, over 60% of Americans say the government is broken beyond repair. When that belief hits critical mass, it's not just political, it's operational. Cities like San Francisco, Chicago, and Portland are already in partial collapse. Crime unpunished, public schools half-filled, police overwhelmed or ordered to stand down, trash piling up, stores leaving. These are collapse zones, modern examples of imperial territory lost without foreign invasion. And when it becomes national, when supply chains freeze, benefits don't arrive, elections aren't trusted, taxes aren't collected, there is no reboot. The system doesn't come back. That's where we are now. Not in danger of failing. Already failing. The US government exists on inertia and illusion, and once either runs out, the entire edifice falls. Not with fire, but silence. Lights off, phones dead, system unavailable. One sudden shock, the black swan that ends the illusion. Collapse doesn't announce itself. It doesn't schedule a press conference. It comes fast, triggered by one unthinkable event. Historians call it a black swan, a surprise that everyone later pretends was obvious. For Spain, it was the silver running dry and the bankers saying no more. For Britain, it was World War I, turning creditors into debtors. For the Soviet Union, it was the price of oil collapsing in 1985 overnight, the money was gone. The empire unraveled in less than 900 days. So what will it be for the United States? A debt default? A cyber attack that erases bank balances? A run on the dollar that forces the Fed to choose between hyperinflation or insolvency? Any one of them ends the illusion in a week. Imagine waking up to find interest rates doubled overnight, the dollar dumped by foreign banks, the stock market frozen, gas stations empty, ATMs offline, not 10 years from now, next quarter. And here's the terrifying part, the pieces are already in place. The US debt ceiling is suspended until 2025, but when it's reinstated, the math doesn't work. The Treasury is borrowing over $1 trillion every 90 days. If interest rates spike, that becomes impossible. One bond auction failure. Just one. And panic begins. Or maybe it's geopolitical. Taiwan invaded. Global trade freezes. The US forced to respond, and we realize we can't. Or it's a domestic shock. A major bank failure. A false flag cyber event. A contested election that leads to mass civil unrest. Doesn't matter what triggers it. Once the confidence breaks, the fall is immediate. Just like 2008. Just like 1929. Just like every collapse before. But this time, we've already used up all the bailouts, all the stimulus, all the trust. This time, the system doesn't bounce back. Because we're not in a recession, we're in the final chapter of empire. And once the black swan lands, the headlines won't read crisis. They'll read, it's over. You've just seen all 10 stages. Not theory. Not fiction. History. Repeating itself again. And now the pattern isn't just playing out, it's accelerating. The lies we tell ourselves about our strength, our money, our future, they're the same ones Spain believed, the same ones Britain clung to, the same ones the Soviets muttered while their rubles turned to dust. Empires don't die because someone attacks them. They die because no one inside believes in them anymore. Look around. Our currency is rotting. Our cities are crumbling. Our leaders are detached. Our people are divided. And while everyone's glued to screens, binge-watching collapse in real time, the gears of empire grind to a halt. You don't get a warning shot. You don't get a reset. Collapse doesn't send a calendar invite. It just happens. The currency breaks. The systems fail. The food stops moving. The lights flicker. And suddenly the empire isn't collapsing. It's gone. Reduced to headlines, a warning, a cautionary tale told in classrooms no one can afford to heat. The blueprint has been followed. Step by step, mistake by mistake. And now there's one question left. Do you still think you're different? If you want to understand what happens next, if you want to recognize the collapse as it hits, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to survive it, subscribe. Because when the blackout comes, when the banks freeze, when the empire vanishes in a week, you'll want to remember how we got here. And I'll still be showing you the pages they never wanted you to read.